All right, welcome back in. So, with this one here, we're going to look at the actual research process that we're going to be talking about throughout the course of the semester. I wanted to give you this kind of snapshot look at it early on because you will be doing for your final projects a research proposal slash research project that you'll be doing. So, I wanted you to be able to see how this kind of unfolds early on so you can have an idea of it. We're going to go pretty quick through each one of these because we are definitely going to be getting more in depth into each one of them. But I did want to kind of give you like a peripheral kind of look at the process. So, when you're going through the process of research in the real world, it's not always so linear as the way that we're going to do it in class. So, what I mean by that is it doesn't necessarily have to go in this exact order like we'll be doing in class. Sometimes you might do step three and go back and do step two, or you didn't quite get enough done in step three. Now you're on step five, you got to go back to three. It just depends on the way that things are unfolding. And in class, it's going to be a lot more linear. It's going to be a lot more step one, two, three, four, all the way through step eight, so that you're in this controlled environment, and we want you to learn the steps and how to put them together. But in the real world, it won't necessarily be this step by step and linear. So let's have a look at the overall process as a whole, all eight pieces of it, and then we're going to break down each individual one real quick. So here is the overall research process. Starting up at the top, we've got our topic selection. We do a thing called a literature review. From the literature review, we gather research questions and research objectives. We form hypotheses. We determine which method of research we're going to use to answer those questions or test those hypotheses. Once we decide what method we want to use, we figure out what population and the sample from that population would be best to administer that method to. We collect data from them, analyze that data, and then we write the report based on our findings. And basically the report that we have tells this whole story that you see on your screen here, from topic selection all the way through the interpretation after we do the analysis of the data. So I want to look at each one of these individually real quick to give you an idea of how the process works. So first and foremost, we've got the topic selection, right? There's three different elements here that I like to always point out whenever you are coming up with a topic that you need to do some kind of research project on, whether you're going to write a speech for something, whether you're writing a book. I mean, this really applies anytime that there's some kind of audience that's involved. This really applies to that. So we've got the topics that you know intersecting with the topics that you care about, which intersects with the topics that people care about, right? Because remember, we have to consider our audience as well. So the sweet spot, this is it right here, where all three of them intersect. That a sweet spot between what you know and what you care about, and what the audience or people in general are going to care about. That's what you want to focus on. So let's say, for example, I know social media and I know politics. I know that people, they care about how social media impacts political discourse and public opinion. And I care about figuring out why some people are real vocal on social media when it comes to politics and others are really quiet. So that will be the topic that we are going to select for this course. Or we're going to have, as we go through the research process, as I teach it to you, we're going to have this mock study that we'll be doing kind of as a group. So as we go through each part of the process, I will be relying on this study. And the study will be the factors that impact participation in political discourse on social media. That's what, as a group, we're going to do this kind of fake study on as we go through the semester. So once we come up with the topic idea, now we want to do the literature review. So what is a literature review? Well, there's these 7 different steps to a literature review. We want to start off by, we've got the question identified. It says here to review discipline styles. So we want to think about what we're going to talk about next week, which is called meta-theoretical considerations. Again, we're going to talk about it next week, so I don't want to get into it too much here, but it's basically the way that we think research should be conducted based on how we view things like reality and knowledge and all those kind of things. We'll talk more about that next week, but we want to pay attention to the way that the discipline and styles are being done. Now, we want to search the literature. What does this mean? It means that I want to start looking at all of the different topics, the different papers, the different articles, the different books, the different works that have been done surrounding the concepts that I want to look at in my study. Right. So the information, it's already out there. We need to go find that information. Once we start to gather this information, we need to manage it. We need to figure out which parts of it we want to keep, which parts don't really apply to our study, which parts are definitely something we want to use as a foundational kind of framework for what it is that we're putting together. We want to manage those references and we want to look at them. We want to evaluate them. We want to judge them. If you remember back to your intro to public speaking days, we're talking CRAP tests here, where we're looking at the credibility, the reliability, the authority, all those things, right? We're wanting to really make sure that what we're using as our framework is good quality literature. We want to synthesize, which I'm going to talk more about here in a second, and then we write that literature review. So a literature review, to take the example that we just talked about, if I'm looking at the factors that impact political discourse on social media. I want to look into political discourse. I want to look into participation on social media, on someone's willingness to speak out, on political issues. Basically, everything that has to do with my topic, I want to look into. How has it been studied already? What have the experts in the field already done when it comes to those topics? I don't want to do the same thing, but I do want to do something that lines up with what they're saying. I want to help create a theoretical or a literature framework for how I'm going to do my study. I want to keep an eye out for established theories that could give me some kind of direction and structure. For example, in the study that I just proposed, the spiral of silence theory would be an excellent theory that we could utilize to help give us some framework to understand why some people speak out more than others when it comes to political discourse. So doing the research would help me find those kind of that kind of stuff for my framework. So there's two key factors here. The first is I want to find the gap in the literature. So what does that mean? What that means is there's that sweet spot between what has already been learned and what I'm trying to figure out. I don't want to just redo a study that someone else has done. I don't want to just replicate other people's work. But at the same time, I don't want to do something that's so far out that it doesn't match up with anything that anyone else has been doing, right? We need to have that consistency. It needs to be based off of reality. It needs to be based off of empirical research. So I need to find that gap in the literature. Yeah, people have talked about this, this, and this, but they haven't looked at it from this angle. That's what I want to find. That's that gap in the literature. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about literature reviews that you'll have to write for your projects. The other thing is this right here, to synthesize your literature. When you write a literature review, you want to synthesize, not stack the literature. What I mean by that is you don't want to just bombard your reader with a whole bunch of studies, one right after another. Take the time to explain what the study was about. Put it in your own words, give your interpretation of it, show why it matters for what it is that you're studying, then move on to the next study and show what they had come up with there. Let them speak through their work that they have done, and then you back it up with your own thoughts and feelings on that topic and everything like that. So that's something also that we'll talk about more, is the synthesis of literature as opposed to the stacking of literature. It's a very it's a difficult thing for a lot of people to do, but hopefully through writing labs and things like that I'll have with you, you'll be able to do that in no time. Okay, so once I have consumed the literature, read the literature, understood the literature, found that gap in the literature, now I want to develop my research objectives rather, my research questions and my hypotheses. Research objectives, these help to guide the whole research process once you establish them. They help you stay focused, they help you identify the scope of your study, the methods you're going to use for your study. Right? They align with the research. So with research objectives, what you're really doing is you're laying out the very groundwork for what it is that you are going to cover in this study. Why are you going to do the thing you're going to do? Who is it going to impact? What is it that you're looking for? Right? These research objectives are extremely important. Now, research questions and hypotheses, we're going to touch on these quite a bit later, so I'm not going to talk about them too much here today. But research questions, we utilize these when we don't really know too much about the subject that we're dealing with. Certainly not enough to make any kind of prediction about what we think is going to happen. Hypotheses, though, we do feel confident enough in our knowledge of the subject to where we can make some type of prediction about what's going to happen. So we'll talk more about that later in the semester. Once we have created those research questions and those methods, or I should say those objectives rather, and the hypotheses, now we want to look into the methods that we're going to use to answer those questions and test those hypotheses. Are we going to use qualitative research methods? Are we going to use quantitative? Are we going to use a mixed method approach where we're using some of both? What are the sampling techniques that we're going to use? How are we going to go about collecting data? Are we going to use surveys? Are we going to do interviews? Are we going to do focus groups? How are we going to collect the data from the people that we feel are the right people to collect that data from? And we are going to talk so much more about research methods as we go. So I really don't want to touch on it too much here. We'll get into the quantitative, qualitative aspects and things like that next week. Now, once we have that method, we need to administer the method to the people, right? We need to study the people so that we can figure out what's going on. How can I answer these questions, test these hypotheses? So the population that we're dealing with are all of the people that would have something to do with that thing that we are studying. For example, if I am studying social media users, when it comes to how they are doing political discourse on social media, I'm talking about millions and millions of people because there are millions and millions of social media users. That's the population. We can't always reach the entire population. We don't have everybody's contact information that's a social media user. So, what we need to do is we need to extract a sample from that population. But that sample that we take needs to represent the population that we're pulling it from. And we'll talk more about this later on whenever we are talking about sampling and things like that. But for now, keep that in mind, right? That we're trying to figure out who the best group of people are for us to give our method to, whether that's a survey, whether that's sitting them down for interviews, whatever the case may be. Okay, then after we have established who our sample is and population is, now we got to do the data collection. Now we want to go out there and collect the data. We want to administer surveys. We want to do interviews. We want to do focus groups. We want to do ethnographies. We want to do all these different things that we could do. You could see them here on your screen. You know, we could do social media monitoring. We could do direct observation, online tracking. We could do all those kinds of things to gather data about these people that we have some kind of interest in, and this phenomenon that we have some kind of interest in. So once we have delivered those tools through the research methodology, right, the survey, the interview, whatever the case may be, now we start collecting that data. As I'm interviewing a person, the words that I say and that they say, that becomes data. As I send a survey out to a sample and they're filling out that survey and returning it back to me, that becomes data. So I'm collecting data at this point. Once I receive the data, obviously I need to analyze the data. If I am a qualitative researcher, that analysis will be me reviewing transcripts of interviews that I have done, reviewing transcripts of focus groups, looking at my notes that I took during an ethnography, and looking for different codes and clusters and themes within all of those transcripts that I have. If I'm a quantitative researcher, I'm pouring through all of the numerical, statistical information that I have, all of those ones, fives, sevens, all those numbers that I've gathered from my survey that my people have filled out. I'm importing all of that data so that I can start to analyze it. I'm going to be using, if I am a quantitative researcher, statistical methods to do that. I'm going to do correlations. I'm going to do descriptive and inferential statistics. I'm going to do multiplication multiple regression analyses, whatever it is necessary for me to answer my research questions and to test my hypotheses, I will do that. Once we have analyzed the data, now it's time to write the report. We want to write a report from the start to finish, why we did what we did, how we did what we did, what happened when we did what we did, right? That's the writing of the actual report. And that's it, right? That's um, the long and short of the research process. So we're done there. And again, that was rapid fire, but we're going to be touching on all these concepts as the semester progresses. So for now, I want you to start thinking about topics that you want to research and how you might go about doing that research. Next week, we're going to start looking at research methodologies like quantitative versus qualitative methodologies. And we're going to look at this thing called meta-theoretical considerations. Right? It's a lot of syllables, but it's a pretty cool concept that really drives the way that we do the research that we do. So you will be getting together with your groups and talking about different ideas of what you'll have for what you want to do for your projects and everything. So start actively working on that. Work on talking with your group members about what you want to do for your topic that you're going to do for your research study. As always, if you have any questions, you can email me at bts2@uakron.edu. Have a great week, and I will see you all next week.